Hello and welcome to the CAPE podcast. CAPE standing for the Child Abuse Prevention and Education Podcast. My name is Kristi McVie and I am an ex-West Australian police officer who spent 10 years with the police where I was trained as a specialist child interviewer and a child abuse detective. This podcast is all about sharing what I learnt, saw and knew whilst investigating child sexual abuse in the police force. It is also about sharing the knowledge that I gained in that time that helped me with my own parenting of my then 2-year-old daughter. My mission is to help share my knowledge and to help you in your role as parents to keep your kids safe, along with guest experts in the field of child abuse prevention and education, both in person and online. Thank you so much for joining in on the fight to prevent child sexual abuse. Your kids will thank you for it. Welcome back to the CAPE podcast. I'm with the wonderful Renee Simpson, who I think, Renee, I'm just trying to remember how we met, but I think it was through a business group that we were in, and then we've been following each other for a while. It's interesting. So many of my podcast guests are basically people I've met on the internet, which is cool. And one day I hope to meet all of them. But yeah, so Renee and I connected and I was really impressed with the work you're doing in the space of supporting victim survivors of sexual assault and child sexual abuse, as well as the fact that you're a facilitator with the Survivor Hub, which is another really important initiative. And then you're also an author of I Want to Go Home. So without me telling everyone what you do and exactly who you are, can you just share with my listeners who you are, what you do, and how you got here to this work?
Big question. I could be the whole podcast. Okay. You could say, I guess we could start back when I guess the book writing journey, I guess, would be the first thing that happened in that process. So
Yeah,
I would
sure.
say, so in my early 20s, did the gap year thing, lived over in London, traveled around Europe, had a wonderful time. And then I ended up accepting this amazing invitation to sail a boat from the south of Spain, was Gibraltar, to Phuket, which took 3 months, and I had no sailing experience. And everything that possibly could go wrong went wrong. Sailed through, ended up, the worst possible thing was that we sailed through a Category 5 cyclone for 3 days, so that was hectic. So yeah, almost died. It was insane. We ran out of food on a couple of legs. What else? Like, just the boat was always breaking down, like there's massive mechanical failures, ripped sail, sheets. Yeah, it was extremely stressful. But I found and so what I did is, like, on that trip, is I kept a journal and journaled the whole thing. And it wasn't until I went home and started to work with a book coach, which was many, many years later, like I'm talking 10 years, and I did lots of different, I did like an eat, pray, love, went to Bali, and I was like, I'm going to finish my book this time. And I just took myself off for a couple of weeks. But I found, like, I kept picking this book up every couple of years, and every time I'd change, as a person, I was changing and evolving. And I'm like, every time I'd read what I'd written, I'm like, I don't want to say that. That's not what I want to say now. And so, 10 years later, I actually was like, no, fuck it. I need to finish this. And then I thought, I got really serious, and I started working with a book coach, the amazing Danielle Anderson. She's over in America. She's and it didn't cost me an arm and a leg either. It was pretty affordable. I didn't have a budget, and I had lots of times I explored, like, should I, look for a publisher? Should I find an agent? Should I go through, like, the vanity publishers? And it was just really confusing and hard to sort of navigate. And so I made the decision that I was going to self-publish, because it was just like, I don't know, that's just where I keep coming back to. Anyway, so, and she really helped me, because at that time, you had the amazing Grace Tame, who was doing amazing work with Nina Fennell around the Let Us Speak movement. We had Me Too had just come about, the Me Too movement, and I was definitely someone who put a hand up and said, yeah, this happened to me. And so, I don't know, I thought just this urgency of needing to tell my story. And so working with this book coach, she helped me to she kept saying, you keep dropping little, like, she said, it's kind of like you're skipping stones of your trauma, like, through your book. But she said, but the way you skip the stones, it's so like it doesn't matter, and she said, and I think the truth of your story is the trauma. It's like, it's the fact that it was the secret that you were holding when I went overseas. So I had child sexual abuse when I was 6. told my parents when I was 8 and went through the whole, attempted to go through the justice system, but we ended up pulling back from that just with the advice of police that said, this is really not a system that's set up for children. You know, this could do a lot more damage than the justice that she's going to probably get out of it. And so, yeah, that scared my mum off enough to sort of go, okay, we're not going to do this. I'm not going to put my daughter through that. And my mum was already extremely, extremely traumatized just from going through the whole process because she had her own trauma that she'd been carrying. And so, it happened to me again in my early 20s where I was raped by a best friend's boyfriend at a party when I passed out. And so the next morning woke up with these like memories of like this, you know, of him over me. And so I had a week before I flew out on my gap year trip. So I think it was very much premeditated.
Wow.
I think he very much knew, like, I don't think she's gonna do anything within a week. You know what I mean? So I flew out. I didn't say anything. I told one friend. I told a couple of just friends, but it was that victim. It was very much like some victim blaming went on.
Yeah.
It was just really hard. And I really wanted to tell my friend too what he'd done. And it was just a really horrible weight to bear.
Yeah.
And I remember I felt like that was hanging over me my whole trip, you know. And then so jumping on this amazing sailing boat or this amazing adventure, it was such a wonderful, it really happened, but it was also this wonderful metaphor of what it's like living with the impacts of sexual assault, because it's literally like sailing in the fucking middle of a category 5 cyclone, you know. And I definitely felt like it threw me off course. I definitely felt like I was really like, I don't know, like surviving on this boat with like captured head sails. Like that's exactly how I felt, how I was living, you know. It really like shook me to the core, made me feel awful, and all those horrible things. But anyway, so yeah, working with this book coach, she really helped me to really channel all of that, bring it all into the story. And then, yeah, it's such a beautiful story now, and I'm really, really proud of it. And I love that, you know, when I get responses from people that DM me or whatever and just say, hey, this is so relatable. And this is such a lovely first step of support for anyone that's thinking about, you know, if they've experienced it and haven't started talking about it or haven't told anyone, haven't disclosed. It's just a really nice self-care, self-help, soft place. Like I don't go into the trauma. I'm really about the impacts. You know, I talk about the barriers to why I didn't, you know, go to police or I didn't report and, you know, the stigma. There's so many things. There's so many things to unpack, as you'd know. And so, yeah, so I'm very proud of my second baby there. And so, yeah, so that was sort of, I guess, that part of my journey. And then I guess with my work, I did a social science degree. After traveling, actually, I went to Cambodia, went to these amazing like countries. And for me, like I literally thought I was going to leave school and do a Bachelor of Business Tourism Management because I wanted to travel. And then I did literally like a month of that. And I was like, this is not for me. And so I dropped out and then just got a bit of life experience, 2 years just working, and I ended up doing hospitality management at TAFE. So my whole thing was just around travel. And then, but getting overseas and having some real life experience and seeing a lot of this injustice and seeing a lot of poverty and just seeing a lot of social issues that I hadn't really, you know, I guess I wasn't conscious of in Australia as much as over in these other countries. And so they kind of really shook me. And so when I came home, I was like, I want to help. I don't know how. And that's when I started just sort of doing some research, and I loved anything to do with like counseling, psychology, sociology, loved all those sorts of subjects. So yeah, so I jumped in and did that. I loved every minute of that degree. And then started off straight, obviously, like being quite young. I was 23 in my degree, finished at 26. I didn't really feel like I had enough life experience to work with adults. So youth was just like an easy progression. But ended up working up in the Northern Territory, working in, for Brahmini, they were called. It was a behavioural rehabilitation centre.
Yeah.
The young people realised that was not for me because it was very much like punitive, you know, run by an ex-military guy, special services. And so, so I lasted 6 months and I was like, this is not my jam. And then I ended up moving to Brisbane and then got into like out-of-home care, working with young people who experienced trauma. Absolutely love that work. I think the biggest challenge in that work was that the system itself
It's
and
not
just
really set up for supporting people.
not set up to be supporting people. It's not set up to be supporting young people. It's not really set up to be supporting the workers in that,
No.
that work in the field. So that was really not. I had wonderful experiences with the kids most of the time, but I think the whole system was just really negative and very disappointing for everyone, So it was hard. And even seeing the young people when they self-sabotage because they're so used to disappointment that they just go, oh, what's the point of even being hopeful or, working towards some sort of joyful experience when it's just so easily taken away. And there's just, that stuff
Yeah.
really. So then I went into disability, managing a disability service for women with intellectual disabilities. Loved that, did that for a year. And then I moved into working in schools. And this became like my biggest passion, was working as a school counsellor, youth support in these wonderful schools in Brisbane. Loved it. Worked with young people from refugee backgrounds. Yeah, lots of different young people. And then I decided I didn't want to do so much of the one-on-one counselling. I love group work. I'm really, really passionate about group work.
Yeah.
But I found the one-on-one counselling was starting to burn me out quite a bit. And so, I wanted to take a back step and do more community development work. And that's where I moved into working for local government in the youth space. Now I get to manage a youth centre. I get to go out to schools and do wellbeing talks. I coordinate the Love Bites program, Love Bites Respectful Relationships program in my region. And you get to work with a lot of different community services. And I love it because I get to be the yes person. So they come to me and they're like, hey, can you help us with this? Can you help us with a space for this program? And there's just so many things, as you would know, in this working in government or working with these different processes and systems. Like there's still a lot of like rules and regulations. And so if you can if you're someone that's a decision maker that can, make things a bit easier for support services and for young people to access support, I feel like that's our job. Like we should be trying to make things as easy as we can and sort of removing that red tape as much as we can. So I love that I get to do that. And then Survivor Hub then came after. So it was my book, and then I launched, and then I spent, on maternity leave, I worked on Shake the Walls, which was a reflective writing course for sexual assault survivors, because I really wanted to help other survivors to write their stories, not so much to write a book or write a memoir, but more around, I found something really changed in me when I found this amazing, and I think it was quite unconscious, this story arc. Like, I mean, working with a book coach, they always help you to come up with a book plan.
Yeah.
But that's still very much on you, like how you direct that. Like no one tells you how to do that. It's just like write your chapters, what's the purpose of your chapters, etc. But some sort of like unconsciously or subconsciously, I don't know which is the best word to choose, but I wrote this really beautiful, I sort of followed this story arc unbeknownst. And when I came out, I was like, man, that's just it's a story of resilience. It's a story of resilience, right? And I'm like, I want other people to be able to write their stories of resilience and sort of really crack out of that, the victim, our victim stories, because I think that's what I was stuck in for ages. And not even just with the sexual assault stuff. It was like when my brother passed away, because a lot of our traumas are complex. And so it was like, how do we get out of that space? And how do we start carrying ourselves differently and thinking of ourselves differently and like rewriting how we see ourselves? And so doing this work really helped me sort of really find a lot of confidence in myself and really helped me to really understand a lot more of where I wanted my purpose and a lot more of where I wanted my meaningful work to go.
Yeah.
And so
that's impactful. That's really impactful for survivors, especially, to, like you said, it doesn't have to result in a book, but getting those feelings, thoughts, and that trauma out of your mind and onto paper means that you can process it.
For sure. And I think, and writing that victim impact statement, which obviously was a part of my journey too, like I never really sat there and thought of all the things, how my life had truly been impacted by it. And I think those two pieces of writing are the most important, I think, in a sexual assault survivor's journey. And I mean, there's obviously, we know it's an ecosystem for healing. Like there are so many different aspects that we need to incorporate. And obviously that's where I think Survivor Hub is this whole other part of that ecosystem. And we just got some really beautiful research back from RMIT for Survivor Hub. And it was, what do you call it, like confirming, in the sense that a lot of people said this is the missing part,
Yeah.
in our healing, in our recovery. And it's the fact we can all come together and we can share, and we actually feel a sense of belonging, and I know, like, I've gone to lots of different support groups for different reasons. And I felt like I've never really found myself or any sense of belonging in these other places. But I tell you what, Survivor Hub is where I see myself in everyone that's
Yeah.
there. It's beautiful. And so I can see we're really going to build something really special with this community.
Yeah, and it's interesting that, like, I didn't realize, or probably didn't connect in writing my book, and only one small chapter of my book is about me. It's about my story, about how I got to here.
Mm.
And when I was writing that down, I mean, it was a lot longer when I first wrote it, but then it got edited down and simplified, because my book's not about me. But when I was writing it down, the cathartic release of some of my childhood trauma was amazing. It made me process it. It made me reflect on it. It made such a big difference. And it was almost like, by the end of that process, when I eventually, and I'm not saying everyone has to put a book out, but by the time I published my book, and I self-published as well, I had released it all, and it no longer had any power over me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the powerful thing about writing, getting it out of your head and writing it down. We can talk about it till the cows come home, but when you put it on paper, there's something powerful happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's amazing, Shake the Walls and what you're doing in the Survivor Hub is that you're giving people a moment to reflect, to really dive deep into what has happened, how it's impacted them, how it no longer, and allowing it to be released so it no longer has power over them.
Absolutely. And even like, and I love that. And what I love about Shake the Walls is that story of resilience. It actually has people, it gives them time to reflect on their strengths, their skills, like what they did to pull themselves out of those shitty times. Or, so they might reflect on victim blaming experiences. They might reflect on reporting experiences. They might reflect on disclosing experiences. And some could be really like positive, some could
Yeah.
be negative, and that's okay. So it's really an invitation to look at all the different perspectives of their story.
Mm.
And I mean, even when I wrote mine, I had to reflect on my mother's perspective, because I definitely think I was stuck in a bit of a blame mum for
Yeah.
why don't we go down that justice path? Like, she took that from me. But then when I did this perspective taking through that, reflective writing process, I was able to really come to this beautiful sense of compassion and forgiveness and understanding for mum. Like,
Yeah.
shit, what would it be like for me if I had her lived experience, and then my daughter was going through that? Could I actually support my daughter through the justice system? And I probably would have made exactly the same decision as her, or I would have probably found a lot more support for my daughter to be able to do what she wanted to do, in terms of respecting her autonomy, that she wanted to go down that path.
Yeah, because it's not all black and white, cut and dry. Like, it's not all, it's not so simple. When you're supporting someone through sexual assault or from child sexual abuse, when you're supporting someone else, that it can trigger so much in yourself that you end up almost, vicariously going through it with your child or the person. So it takes a lot, and that's why we have support services, not as many as we need, but that's why we have support services in this space, to be able to offer that support. That's why we have psychology, counseling, and groups, because we need them. We can't do it alone. We're not, there's no I in team, and it is a team effort to get through some of this stuff. And I know from one victim when I was in the police, and he was a historical victim, and he'd spent 30 years holding it, hadn't told anyone about what had happened. It impacted his whole life. His whole life had been impacted. And when he did sat down with me, and it took such a long time to get through his many years of abuse, he said to me at the end of the process, which was really tough, that he said to me, it feels like it's taken it all off my shoulders. It feels like that my whole perspective has changed. And that was just going through the statement process, and it's not an easy process, and it's not fun, and it's not something that a lot of victims get much relief from, or, just, they don't feel a sense of justice by giving a statement. But because he'd held it for so long, I think it just finally telling someone was enough to make him feel like it, for him, it was a moment of healing. And maybe it was because I was the person taking that statement. I don't know. But I think at the same time, there's so many ways that we can be unburdening ourselves, because it's not, yes, it happens to us, but we're not responsible for what has happened. We're not the ones who did it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And like, that's the toughest thing that we see at Survivor Hub. It's that common experience of perhaps like the shame, the blame, but even how we coped. It's a lot of shame towards how we've coped in the past.
Yeah.
And, and I guess like society and the people around us and how they've judged us on that, and the stigma around that. If we know like drug and alcohol is a massive issue for sexual assault survivors. So we know the stigma around drug and alcohol abuse. So, and I even hear like the stigma around even self-identifying as a victim survivor can be like a real shame. A lot of people don't want to do that either.
Well, because it's quite common for people to say, "Oh, well, just get on, like just move on." Like, what are you still talking about that for?
Yeah,
and just minimizing someone's experience is very traumatic. It's a very traumatizing thing to do. And it happens to us by our family members, it happens to us by peers, because, and sadly, if we don't face what's happened, like if we don't face it and do the work, which is really hard to do, like you said, substance abuse is a massive, I think it's like 8 times, more 8 times. Yeah. Substance abuse and it's because we don't have the tools in our tool belt to be able to know how to deal with this stuff. And no one sat down with us and said, well, actually, you weren't in the wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. It's not your fault. Your body's going to have all of these responses to trauma. And if you get triggered and then you go and have kids and you add kids to it, and then they bring up all of your trauma and trigger you. And so, we've got to give ourselves a little break and be a little bit kinder to ourselves, because until what you don't know, you don't know. But when you know better, you can do better. And that's really, I live by that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's just about trial and error too. Like, and I love, like you mentioned, there's parts of the journey that aren't fun at all. Like even applying for, victim recognition payments, you've got to, see a counsellor in there, get a report made. Sometimes most often you'll have to, have already reported to police in some way, and you'll need to look at that report again, especially if it's child sexual abuse, and that can be extremely triggering. And that gets talked about quite a bit at Survivor Hub too, going through that process. And so we talk about there needs to be more support around, counselling for people that are going through that process, because even receiving that report, like I remember for me, receiving that report was huge, like actually reading as an adult what the police had wrote, like the actual investigation that, there was another young person that they suspected might have been going through the same thing in my street. These are things I wasn't aware of, and nothing that my mother had told me about.
Oh.
But yeah, and then there was even like there was something written on it that it was like special investigation or something like that. There was a task force assigned. And I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
The report that were like blanked out.
Redacted.
And at the same time, we still didn't have his name. Like we knew like that he went by Bob, but we didn't have any like real name in there, like first name, surname. And I thought, even as a victim survivor, do I have the right? Don't I have the right to know who my perpetrator was?
I would say yes.
So I wonder
For
why that
sure.
was. But yeah, but that was a big.
I mean, it was probably a while ago, wasn't it? Because you were only 6. Yeah, and look, policing definitely has its pitfalls. As there's a lot to be said about. I wish I knew what I knew now when I was a police officer and detective investigating. I think I was always very compassionate, empathetic, and I did my best. But there was times where I know I could have done better, like in hindsight. And and I think a lot of police officers, that they haven't, 1 in 4 Australians, or more than 1 in 4 Australians, are walking around as victims of child sexual abuse, right? So could you imagine there's multiple police multiple police in the job who haven't ever really done anything about their own trauma, and then vicariously going through trauma every time they take, they're ticking time bombs, most of them.
I would love to see a police officer come to the Survivor Hub. I really would. Because, and that gets talked about a lot of us are in these fields because we're healing. We become the
Yes.
protectors. We become the healers. We become, whatever we want to help people, like not have these experiences that we had, or try to prevent them, or try to support them that doesn't get so bad for them. So that's something that's so common, that we all go into
Oh,
these professions.
we want to fix everyone and help everyone, and then meanwhile we haven't done anything about that little thing that's happened over there when we were 5, and that thing that happened when we were 12 or whenever, and then we get into these jobs and it's like lighting a match to
So what do you
dynamite.
What do you think about this? Do you think, like, I mean, becoming a police officer, would that make you feel the safest in terms of all careers or jobs? Would you
Mm.
feel like, I have this power, I have this authority? Does that make you feel safe?
I never felt that. So
I feel that.
and it's interesting, right? So I actually felt like an imposter the whole time I was in the police. My catchphrase when I was, or whatever, I lived by fake it till you make it. So I literally put a mask on every time I put the uniform on, or my belt or whatever, and I was putting a mask on pretending that I had it all together and I knew what was going on. I
Mhm.
mean, I do know a lot, but I didn't ever feel like I knew what I was doing. Does that make
Mm.
sense? And
Yeah.
it felt like I was completely had no clue, even though I can recite things back to front, and I was, I was in my feels a lot of the time, so I was always, I got called because I would be at search warrants, drug search warrants, life coaching the person we were doing the warrant on, or talking to them about
Oh,
how they got there.
yeah.
And my the and because it's a very male dominated industry,
Mm.
obviously, a lot of them would be like, oh my gosh, why don't you just become a life coach, because you're just coaching everyone and talk. And they some of them said it nicely, some of them
Mm.
said it in not so nicely ways, because they were
Mm.
sick of hearing me trying to help people. But
Mm.
for me, I was just like, there's always a reason. There's always a reason why someone got there.
Absolutely.
And why not help them realize that while I can, while
I
I'm
thought
in
that was
their
the job.
space?
I thought that's your job, protect and serve.
I know, but you're not meant to like coach people into being good, or to not selling drugs, or
Human relationships help. Those human conversations are helpful.
yeah. So I don't think, a lot of police in the job probably felt exactly like I did. I don't think anyone goes into that job like you, and it's like an onion, right? There's layers and layers and layers and layers of stuff. And it's, when you're in the police, you're the person that everyone looks to. You're the person that everyone expects to know what to do. And you've kind of it took a long time for me to get over the fact that everyone was staring at me.
Mm.
And because I'm only 5'1" and I was in like a police uniform. No, but they were staring at me because I had a uniform on. I was a
Yes.
police officer, not because of what I look like or who
And
I
lots of
am.
people have had different experiences with police officers, so there's lots of different
Exactly. And it
projects going
took a
on.
long time. It took a long time. And I don't think in the whole 10 years I was in the police, I ever got over the imposter feeling. Like, I don't know how. And now 4 years after the fact, I'm like, feels like I didn't even do it for 10 years. It's weird. It's so weird. The brain is a weird thing. Memories are a weird thing. It's just crazy.
Do you feel like being in the police force for 10 years, that was traumatic in itself for you?
I don't know if you know this, but I left the job because I had PTSD. So yes.
But
Yes,
I
it
mean,
was
like,
traumatic. It did leave
what?
its own traumas. Yeah. I mean, not like, I loved working with people. I loved helping people. I loved investigating child sexual abuse, and getting that, those wins on the board and helping where I could help.
Mm.
But the system's traumatic, hugely traumatic. And I mean, for anyone who has tried to go and report like yourself, or who hasn't reported because you're worried about the fact that it's the system is broken to the fact that it doesn't support victims, and any good police officer walks away feeling like they haven't done enough.
Mm. Yeah, and that's what I was getting at, that part. Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
And
So,
what
but
do you
it's good.
think?
It's good.
And what do you think about the whole like recruitment and the training of police officers? Because like, I was only just raising this on my story recently about, you know, we all go and get degrees, like you mentioned before, like if you work in human services or like social work, for example, we all have to learn how to swim through our own shit, which is like what the one lecturer told me, was like, that's what we've got to do, to learn how to swim through our own shit before we can help other people. And I love that. And so like when I did my degree, there was lots of going through my own trauma, and everything was about my history, my family. Like, and I loved that, because when I did come out, I was like, I know myself. That was a really fucking hard experience, but I know who I am, and I also know the, you know, like the dark spots and the sort of the areas I should stay away from. So for example, I learned that I should stay away from working with child sexual perpetrators in the youth work field. I mean, I certainly could never work with
Adults.
pedophiles or anything like that. No. So when that did come up in youth work, that was hugely triggering for me. You know, and it wasn't something that was talked about. It was just like thrown on me at last minute. Oh, you're going to be working in this house, and these are the young people's behaviours. And I was like, and I literally went to bed when I came home that night, looking under my bed. Like I regressed back into like my childlike state, like looking under my bed. I was scared of, is there a monster under my bed or something? So it was really, that's a bit sad.
Really sad.
But yeah, so I wonder in terms
There's none of that in the police.
No. Scope for change? Like, do you think?
Huge change, but I just don't think the current training programs, I mean, look, that they're in the last,
like a degree, like a 3-year process?
I don't think there's enough time.
Yeah, there wouldn't be enough time. So you think even, you know, it doesn't matter if it's 9 months, 3 years, you still feel like you would work.
In Western Australia, for instance, it's a 6-month in the academy, learning legislation, powers, use of force, all of that stuff. Then it's an 18-month apprenticeship, traineeship, whatever you want to call it. So you continue but it's on-job learning from that 18 months. And after the 2 years, you get ticked off, right?
Right.
But they don't provide in my time, they didn't provide any training in trauma informed at the time. They didn't provide any training in how to swim through your own shit. And, you know, so it's very interesting that, you know, and that might be the reason why we're seeing such a big rate of PTSD in our police officers, because you've got your shit and then you've got your vicarious trauma on top, and it's just spewing out everywhere after a while.
Huge.
Yeah. So I think in the current way it's set up, there is not enough time, and we're losing police officers left, right and center. So it's possibly that they just can't keep up the police officers to be able to do it. So they just don't have the time in the program to be able to extend it past that time. You know, when you get out of the academy, the academy tells you one thing, the real life is a whole nother ball game. So it's an interesting thing. I just think it could be a 3-year degree, but they wouldn't have first of all, it costs, well, when I went through the academy, it cost 150,000 or maybe even more to put one police officer through 6 months of the academy. So the cost versus the time available versus the need out in the public, I don't think it would work. That's from what I know. Do they need more? Yeah, it probably needs another couple of months in the academy.
Yeah, that helps. It's good to actually talk about the budget, the cost of it. Actually, I haven't heard that side of things before. I spoke to he's a youth liaison police officer, and he said, yeah, there's one module where they do, what was it called? Like, TCI training, like, you know, trauma crisis intervention, where we're de-escalating people. Because I said, like, my experiences have been where I've witnessed like police officers really antagonizing situations, and I'm like, man, like, have you done any sort of like
no, they used to
training?
They used to do verbal judo once upon a time, and when I got to the academy there was none of that. But it's interesting because my family, I said to my husband, are you worried about, because you know, I was 27, 28, 29 when I joined, and I said to him, you know, are you worried about me? And he goes, no, you can talk anyone out of anything. Like, and in actual fact, I was only ever assaulted once, and it was in my 10 years, and it was the one time it happened, it was awesome because it was actually quite hilarious, and the way it happened, and I'm still laughing about it today. But not being assaulted is not a great thing, but I wasn't in any risk at the time. Yeah. And so it's interesting. It's just interesting that they don't teach it. I think again it comes down to time. There's so many there's so much legislation and powers, and so much stuff that they need to learn, and they cram it into like a really short period of time, that there's really no room for all of this emotional well-being, psycho, all of that stuff.
Like they're the practical skills.
I know.
Skills.
I know, and that's why when I get asked if I would recommend policing to people, I say, yeah, when you're old, like go and have a life.
Yeah, and I would say maybe go be a youth worker first, because at least you do learn that TCI training. All youth workers are trained in de-escalating.
Yeah, go and have a life and learn some life skills before you become a police officer. But I tell people that all the time. I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't join the job until I was at least 25, 26 and gone and traveled and done a whole heap of things, because for me, even 10 years in the job, and I did a hard part of the job. A lot of people don't even want to touch child sexual abuse and child abuse.
For sure.
And it takes a certain type of person. But even, just working on the road and dealing with all of the domestic violence that you see, and all of the other, serious incidents that you see, and it's going to have an impact. It's going to leave a mark, and you need to be ready for that. So I think, yeah, those are really interesting questions. But I have a question for you. Do you think that, because you already had your trip planned and stuff before you were sexually abused as an adult or young adult, do you think that that contributed to you taking that 3-month trip that wasn't planned or anything like that? Like, do you think you just jumped on that and was more risk-taking behavior because of that?
Good question. I think at the time I really wanted to live. I really wanted to just have an adventure. And so, it could be a bit of both. I don't know. I could say yes, but I also think there was a big part of me that just wanted to really live my life as an adventure. And I still have that. It's still there. Would I do that now? No, it's too big of too big of an adventure, too big of a risk these days. But like back then I was like, fuck it. And I also called the guy I wanted to get back with when I, back in New Zealand. And I also called my dad. So there was lots of people that were cheering me on, going, just go for it. And the guys that own the sailing school, I asked them to come check the boat out. So I did everything really safe, but I wanted to make sure, am I being crazy? I wanted to make sure people were sort of backing me on this. I think if there was a lot of people saying, no, Renee, this is too crazy or too unsafe, I probably would have backed out. But I'm glad that I had a lot of people cheering me on that were like,
well, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity and stuff. But I think how old were you when you went?
21.
If my 21-year-old daughter said to me she's going on a 3-month sailing across the world, basically, and she's going to be on this boat for 3 months, and I would probably go.
2 people that were trained.
I would be like, no way, you're not doing that. I'll pay for a Kentucky tour or something. I don't know.
I probably would have said, I'll pay for your flight home,
But I guess, adventure, I'm a bit of an adventurer as well. It's interesting that I think because I had a really interesting childhood, and you might be able to relate, right? When you have something happen in your childhood, and it can be just something, and you might see this in the people you support and stuff. So when you have stuff happening in your childhood, it's sets you up for certain patterns and behaviors in your adulthood, right? So for instance, I had a very tumultuous childhood where there was no real, what's the word I'm looking for? It was very unsettled. So there was times we didn't have anywhere to live. There was times where when my parents separated and I didn't know which way I was going. There were so many little things. Then there was, childhood trauma from abuse and stuff like that. And so I, in my adulthood, was always seeking adventure, seeking challenges. I didn't like to stay long in places. I struggled to set up friendship groups or stay friends with people for a long time. I just don't feel very settled. And even now, even in my 40s, I'm still seeking, searching, looking. for something. And I would say that that's quite common, because my psychologist explained to me, like, you're used to a certain level of, uncomfortable. Uncomfortable is comfortable for you. So when things get like, when the stress like reduces, and so that's why I was in the police and I was okay with all of the stress, and or I wasn't okay. It was like my body told me afterwards, like, what the hell have you just done to us? But
Not that much.
yeah, that was too much. So you shouldn't have gone that far. But
Somewhere in the middle.
yeah, but I'm okay with too much stress, uncomfort. I like change and challenge, and I seek that out now. Whereas when I would say that it's some, like my husband, he's like, why do you have to do that? Like, we've been together 27 years. He's like, why do we have to move every 4 years? Like,
I'm bored.
oh yeah, because things get ho hum, and so I think understanding what our nervous system does and how it works and how it impacts us and all of that stuff has been quite good for me, because it's made me understand why I do what I do.
I've never really reflected on that, but that actually makes a lot of sense to me, for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of sense. Yeah, because I get bored really easily too, and I love setting myself up for different challenges, but it makes a lot of sense that we're so used to, the chaos or the uncertainty, that we're like, yeah, we thrive in it sometimes, like, for
Yeah.
sure. And
And
that's why we like change jobs and things like that too, because we just need more of a challenge. It's funny because I feel like now in this, with fee, I do feel like I've loved the stability of my job. Like, I've been with local government for 5 years, but there is a part of me that still gets bored in some aspects.
yeah,
So I'm like, and I do like think, oh, do I, or don't I, do I look elsewhere? But then I think it's just still because I have a young daughter, that I think the security is
yeah.
something that I'm really like holding on to at the moment. But I think that will change probably in the next couple of years when she goes to school.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned. I think the police fed my need for chaos. So because I was, the 10 years before I joined the police and I was in the workforce, I was changing jobs. Sometimes I'd last 3 months. The longest I lasted was 2 years in a job, and so I was switching jobs left, right, and center, trying things left, right, and center, doing
Yeah.
things left, right, and center, moving every 4 years. Like, I have this pattern of behavior,
Hmm.
and it's because the chaos feels comfortable for me. And
Yeah.
so I feel that a lot of victim survivors could relate to that, if they had to have done the work, like if they sit with it and go. And it was my psychologist who sort of pinpointed it for me, because I just thought that that was me. I was just this one person seeking out all of this stuff, right? And he goes, well, you're used to, like, if we use it as a stoplight system, green, orange, red, your
Hmm.
normal is in the orange, red. You live in that area, and when it gets below the orange and goes into green, that's when your system feels really uncomfortable, and you've got to go find something to create more chaos. You'll start a fight with your husband. You'll talk about moving. And I don't drink anymore because of my brain has completely, I can't drink because it creates a massive depressive spiral. But once upon a time when I was drinking, I would go and have a bender, or, you think about all of the things that we do to create the chaos in our lives. And that happens with survivors all the time.
For sure. For sure. I completely relate to that. Completely relate to that.
I know,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's really interesting when you realize it, and then you realize how much of your life you've spent creating chaos just so that so that you feel more comfortable. And my daughter's, well, we've been in
Alternative, and I think the alternative for me is like you said, it'd be boring. Like, I would feel like this is
yes,
boring, mundane. And I even talked about that even in like my book. I talk about, and that's why I like wanted to get out of the Central Coast. I'm like, oh, it's getting boring, it's mundane. Like, and now I love it. Now I'm like, I love, but maybe because I don't believe in healed, but maybe because I've done a lot of work on myself now, I'm a lot more comfortable maybe with the stability,
yeah.
and I
Also,
think
having kids changes you.
kids, and I think community, like actually building
Mm.
a community of people that you respect, and you can't go and get fucked up on a bender like every weekend like you did when you were like in your 20s.
Yeah,
So now you've actually, people know you out in the world, so I don't know, like, and you're a parent too, so
yeah.
I feel like, yeah, I don't know, maybe it's, yeah, I don't know, but I mean,
You
yeah,
know what
I think
what
I love
happens
it.
when I get bored, or when things get too comfortable? I start going, what is the meaning of my life? Like, what am I here to do? And I try and find something to fill the
You're
void
doing
of
it.
that. I know.
You're doing it
I
right now.
know. I know.
But I think that's what's helpful too, is that we've found that, a lot of people don't have that. They haven't found that purpose or that meaningful direction. And so when you can
Yes.
channel everything into that, yeah, it feels like
Fulfilling.
it feels fulfilling. And I think, and that creates, it's still chaotic. Like, I mean, our lives are still a little bit chaotic. We're trying to start this podcast. We were still all over the place. But there's method to our madness now. I think that's what it is. There's method to
Purpose.
our madness.
There's purpose.
There's purpose, and it's all beautiful. And but I love that a lot of people talk about this at Survivor Hub. They talk about it's all about just building in more good days than bad days.
Yes.
And so you talked about maybe back in the day, like there'd be a lot more chaos than like what you have now because you've got more comfortable. But I think you've built more good days in now
Yes.
than bad days.
Yeah, and then something will throw you for a loop, like I'm sure you see it in your group and stuff like that, where you start creating like this safety and this security, and then life throws you a curveball. Once upon a time, your whole life would have fallen apart, but then you start feeling like you can. I've actually got this. You might have a few less days of feeling comfortable and safe, but then you pick up yourself back up. Once upon a time, something would throw me out for a week or 2 weeks. I would be completely useless to everyone. And now it only throws me out for a day. And so
Yes.
I think that's the thing. Like, we need to realize that, yes, we're always going to have moments where we're not 100% on the ball. We haven't got it all together. We don't have it. But how long are you being held in like that frozen mode for now?
Totally. And you're right. There's only so much we can control. Like I went through like an issue in my relationship with infidelity, last year, and that completely threw me out, and so there's only so much you can control. And you can just be doing your best, living your best life, but you can't control other people around you, in your world that do something stupid that hurt you. And so, and you just have to deal with that, as it comes. But like you said, you could have completely thrown me for like a month or whatever, but it might have just been like a couple of, like the weekend was sort of a real mess, but eventually you can pick yourself up and put yourself back together.
Yeah, and I think that only comes with age, doesn't it? I wanted to ask you, age and wisdom. I wanted to ask you though, with regards to, obviously you went through that, that process as a 6-year-old, and you didn't report till 8. Was there a reason why you didn't report till 8 to your parents? And no shame, blame, or whatever. I'm just
Oh no, not at all. Not at all.
curious, basically.
Didn't have the language.
Didn't have the
Honestly,
language.
didn't have
Yeah.
the language. It was only until Mum and I watched a movie
Right.
about something happened to a little girl that I said to Mum, that happened to me.
Right.
And that's when Mum was like, "Oh, okay." And then I knew that was wrong, that what that person had done, and then we could
Right.
talk about it.
Wow. And that really highlights what I do in prevention education, really, because the earlier we can give our children the language and the understanding that what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, appropriate, safe and unsafe,
Yeah.
the quicker they can speak up and share.
Exactly.
Oh,
Yep.
wow. And then so when you were abused by your friend's boyfriend, again, like you were leaving in a week's time, did you ever end up saying anything to your friend or
Yeah,
sharing
I
with
did
her?
actually. I had quite a surreal experience with that. So I came back from traveling. I was at this festival,
Mm-hmm.
and I had actually had disconnected from all of my school friends as well because of it. And but I didn't hear from them overseas either. So it was just kind of like, okay, they're not really good friends. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
sort of end that. Anyway, we get back. I go to this festival, run into all of them at this festival. And my old best friend says, "Oh, Shane's going to be so excited to see you there or to see you." And I was like it was still like he'd groomed her to think, "Oh my God, like he thinks you're the best, he thinks you're amazing."
Yeah, okay.
Anyway, so I'm like, "Oh yeah, great." I'm thinking, fuck this guy. It's happening today. Like I'm saying something, I'm unpacking this bag. So yeah, so I said, "Yeah, great. I'll see him." So I go over with him, and then I see him straight away. I just go, "Hi, Shane." He comes over, goes to hug me, and I'm like, "Don't fucking touch me." And I said, "You raped me," straight in front of everybody. And he goes, "Yes, I did." I couldn't believe that he said it in front of everybody. He goes, "Yes, I did. And I'm so sorry, Nay." And I was kind of like dumbfounded that he just admitted it in front of everybody, but also grateful, which is a bit weird. But I was like, fuck, thank God, like he made this a bit easier in this experience. But yeah, anyway, it was that quick. I just said, I was kind of shocked, and I just said, you know what? I forgive you, but I'll never fucking forget, and we'll never be friends. And my friend was just like, holy shit. And I looked at her and I was like, did you know that he did that? And she said, I had a feeling. And I was like, you're still fucking with him?
Oh my
and she was like, I don't know, Renee. She said, we were doing a lot of drugs back then. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I was like, was I just like collateral damage because I got drunk at your house and I think I took an MDMA pill or something? And she's like, it's just, we weren't right in the head back then. And I'm like, that's not.
Yeah, but that's not an excuse. And that's why we're seeing right now, you know, this is why we're seeing the generation that we're in right now are struggling to hold people accountable, to what they've done and are doing, because we make excuses for behavior.
Exactly.
I mean, great on him that he apologized, owned it, didn't make excuses. She made excuses though, and that's not okay. She should have said, oh, you know, like she should have been like, so, you know, that's not okay. And, you know, I hope that this guy never did it again.
He died in a car accident a couple of years later. But it was one of those moments, honestly, like my dad called me up. He found out about this guy passing. And then I said to Mitch at the time, I was like, I want to buy a 6-pack of beer. I'm celebrating. And Mitch was like, that's a bit fucked up. And I was like, is it?
Yeah, but trauma creates these kind of responses.
I was like, this is closure for me. I just know that guy, you know, it's closure. Okay, that guy's passed. It's finished. He can't do it to anyone. I don't need to go. You know, you have that guilt about, you know, you feel a lot of guilt around not going through the justice system, and you start worrying, well, could they do it to other people? Like, that's not just a very common. So that just took that all away from me. I was just like,
well, okay. You no longer had that hanging over your head.
Yeah, I didn't have to worry about that.
Because that's the thing, like and sometimes, obviously, when I was investigating child sexual abuse and the perpetrator, once they've been charged, go and takes their own life. And to me, that was always, you're guilty. When they took their own life, it was a guilty verdict, basically. But in the same boat and category with that is that I sometimes saw and I sometimes didn't. Sometimes the survivor didn't feel justified, like they were like, oh, you know, they've gotten away with it. And sometimes they were like, well, now I don't have to worry about him. He's not out in the world, or they are not out in the world. So, you know, like, I know there's a lot of guilt there when someone does something and you haven't gone to police but police, there's such a small percentage of, you know, conviction. I'm not saying don't ever go to the police, by the way. I'm saying, you know, do what is right for you and your family and where you're at. But, you know, the conviction rate is really small. So it can leave people feeling like there is no justice in the justice system.
But I wonder, like, I'm just thinking about how complex that would be, in the sense, like, let's say I did report and let's say he took his life. That would be a different experience for me.
Oh, yeah, completely.
Because then I'd be like,
you were the reason he took his own life. Sometimes the guilt comes back on them.
Yeah, I think that would be really hard. And that's why I do really like, especially like when it comes to peer-to-peer sexual assault, particularly, I think I really love the idea of restorative justice. I really love that idea, because I think pedophiles should totally be locked up, throw away the key.
Correct.
But I think when it comes to peer-to-peer stuff, I think there's an opportunity, and that's why I love Chanel Contreras' stuff that she comes out with. I think accountability, like you said, and then there needs to be opportunities for them to have some sort of education, and then to have some sort of restoration, which is victim survivor led. You know, so if that guy was to say to me, what can I do, Renee? I know I fucked up. I know I did the wrong thing, what I did to you back then, but what can I do that's meaningful where I can make amends in some way? You know, and I could be like, well, you can go and volunteer to clean. I don't know, like I'd make something up where they've got to give back to victim survivors in some, I don't know, it's up to you, whatever's meaningful to you. Like it could be they write a letter of apology. A lot of people don't even get an apology, right? So that's
and a lot of people never take responsibility or accountability.
Right. So, I mean, it's a new way of doing things, but I mean, I think it's something that we need to explore more.
I agree 100%. There's nothing worse, and I wrote this in my book. No police officer wants to see another child or another peer who maybe didn't really understand, or maybe is dealing with trauma themselves and hence why they've gone and harmed another child. No one wants to see that child locked up. They want to see them healed and not doing it again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked on a case. I was the counsellor working with a young person, and we went through that restorative justice because obviously youth justice, that's what they do in youth justice. And she was 14, I think he was 16, and she went into a fawn response. And so he didn't understand. And so obviously then she's disclosed to her parents, and then we're going through, and it took ages. The process did. It was 6 months of we were doing counselling, me and her, and then he was doing counselling with his guidance officer at school, and he had to learn all about consent education because he needed to get into a frame of mind where he could own what he'd done was wrong. And then when he got to that point, that's when we came together for the Youth Justice Conference. And, there was a Braveheart counsellor there that spoke about, from an unbiased perspective about, the impacts of sexual abuse and these sorts of experiences. His guidance officer was there to talk about his process, during these 6 months. His parents were there. They were obviously pretty horrified, I read out her victim impact statement because she didn't feel comfortable doing that, as you can imagine. Her parents were there. It was extremely emotionally charged. That's probably the biggest thing that I felt from it. Like, it's very confronting. But I think if you go through a process like that, I don't think you would ever do something like that ever again.
No, I don't. I could only just imagine coming from having all parties in the same room and all perspectives being shared, and but
Yeah.
I know that would have changed the trajectory of both young person's lives, because the victim survivor gets an opportunity to have their voice heard, and to hear the accountability of the person harming them. But they're kids. This is what sometimes people get so stuck in the fact that, it's their child that was harmed, but any child is capable of harming another child.
The parents were really wonderful, to be honest. There was none of that. They were both very much like, it was an educational learning experience. And both parents came from that, that they've got young people, they are learning. There was no attacking. I can imagine what it would be like. I can only imagine what it'd be like working with some parents that are very, blaming, doing the blame game, not wanting to take any responsibility. That would be extremely a different experience.
And that happens a lot, but you wouldn't probably get them in a room together because, if there's no accountability and they haven't said that they believe, they haven't, in that case, you would only go to the youth justice department if there was they haven't admitted guilt. And so for anyone who's listening, if a situation like this happens, the perpetrator or offender, for want of a better word, because that's what we use in the justice system, has to plead guilty for it to move into a youth justice type of scenario, where youth justice comes in and they do all of this trauma-informed and counselling and education. If it doesn't, it goes into the justice system and it becomes an even bigger mess. But I wholeheartedly agree with the youth justice system of education and accountability and all of that.
Yeah. I thought it was a great experience.
It
was empowering for everybody. And even like you said, the parents had to have counselling too to understand that, there's nothing wrong. Like they were just having this, a normal, how they were talking to each other, texting each other, whatever, photos were shared, whatever. No one did anything wrong in that sense. Like, this is what normal teen relationships look like. She didn't lead him on, So I think it was quite empowering, I think, for everybody. There was obviously, I think probably the thing that made it the hardest was probably their peers around them.
Oh yeah, there's so much pressure from
getting involved because there was lots of judgment. Did she like, is she telling the truth? A lot of that. And I think that really hurt and didn't need to happen. And so I think what I would like to see, especially like the parents listening, is that if you have a young person who's involved, if you know a young person who's involved in a process like this, to ask your young person to stay out of it. It's got nothing to do with them,
Yeah.
and just let
Oh, they become wolves. They honestly do. They
oh,
become so, and they victim blame and they shame
and they
and
were
they,
asking her to explain herself, but I'm going, who do you people think they are?
I know teenagers are the worst, honestly.
Ruthless.
I'm in the middle of it with my teenager, and even it's funny because she said to me, "I was such a horrible human when I was 14." She's only 16 now, right? I was such a horrible human when I was 14. I really and she had some real big problems with peers in that year. She goes, it's only when you look back you realize just how horrible and mean and how you get caught up in it. And
Mm.
so it's really important as a parent. And I was very onto it. Like in the end, I was I was ripping her out of situations and like ripping into her as well. And like reminding her that everyone is human and we all make mistakes and we got to stop judging. But
Yeah.
I think if you're a parent of a young person and they're going through something or their peers are going through something and you're aware of it, talk to your kids about it,
Mm.
because your kids they first of all they need to know what is a bit, because they push boundaries all the time. It's normal for teenagers to push boundaries and they're going to get caught up in the group and the group mentality and that pack mentality. So remind them that we're all humans. Remind them that they need to have a bit more compassion for each other and realize that unless you're those two people or three people or whoever's involved, it's nothing to do with you. And would you want that to happen to you? Would you, if you were in that person's shoes, would you want to be being bullied and
Yeah,
and
a
pressured and
fishbowl. They were literally living in a fishbowl. I felt so sorry for both young people involved
oh, it's horrendous. It's
and
horrendous.
the parents. Yeah,
And then what we see is all of this judgment, shame, blame, and then we see young people harming themselves because
that's
of it,
right.
because the
Yeah,
pressure is so huge. And I mean, I've always said to teenagers, high school is, once you're out of high school, you don't realize how small and pathetic high school is.
oh, thank God. You get out of high school, thank God. I remember being in year 12 just going, I fucking hate most of these people. I can't wait to leave. I'm not
Yeah.
going to with many of them at all.
I know, it's a zoo. It's a zoo. You throw in all of these animals into a confined space and you expect them to coexist, and they're all
Oh,
different breeds. Like,
that's what it's about. I think it's a learning experience just to be able to survive all these different personalities and all these
it's
different people. It's
ridiculous.
it's a weird, fucked up social experiment for sure.
Oh yeah, it's not healthy. I mean, my daughter, the only way we were able to get her out of that mentality, and she's got other, mental health I pulled her out of school and homeschooled her. and
Awesome.
and that journey was pretty intense and tested our relationship, but at the same
Amazing.
time it was what she needed, and she's back in school and she looks at everyone and when drama happens now, she's like, oh my gosh, we're so pathetic, teenagers are pathetic, we're screwed. I'm like, no, once you get to adulthood, half of this stuff doesn't even matter. Actually, 5% of this, you're left with 5% of it and you forget about the rest.
That's right. You have a lot more control over the people that you spend your time with when you leave school. But I mean, there's still like different ways you can still find solace. Like you
Mm,
can go hide out in the library or whatever if you need
I
to. Like
know.
I went and hung out with the boys because just the girls were too much for me with all that.
Unfortunately, we're seeing that boys are just in school now. Boys can be just as catty and mean, and I think that that's because social media has definitely changed the way our young people interact. But that's a
Mm.
whole nother episode of a podcast. So, I guess from your perspective, you went through all of this trauma or these experiences that you have written this amazing book about, and you used that experience of 3 months at sea where you nearly died and all of the other things. You've used that to tell this amazing story. You're in you're in the social well-being space where you're helping young people and you're doing trauma coaching and for sexual assault survivors. Has that healed a little bit of you
Of
doing all of that?
course. Of
Yeah.
course. Yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and that's pretty much what we'll talk about with the at Survivor Hub. Like I think we move into these spaces to help, but and everyone that I meet in this space says that it definitely helps their healing too. For
Mm.
sure. You feel seen, you feel validated every time you connect with someone else's pain, and that's healing,
Yeah, that's
definitely.
true. Yeah, that's awesome. So if people want to read your book or contact you or find out more about what you do, how do they find you?
The easiest thing would be just to jump on to my website,
Yep.
reneemariesimpson.com, and there's links in there to my book. There's links in there to Shake the Walls and all sorts of other fun things that I'm doing. Otherwise, if you just want to jump onto Amazon or any other major online book provider, I'm on there. My book's on there.
Fantastic.
Yeah. If you want to follow me on Instagram too, I'm just Renee Marie Simpson, author.
Yeah, and it's Marie, Marie, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Simpson like the Simpsons.
Simpsons like the Simpsons. Yeah, and I would highly recommend following the Survivor Hub as well if you have an interest in what they are doing, because a lot of things, I mean, being Zoom and everything, we can do so much more now that we don't have to be in person. And sometimes, do you know, I had a moment the other day. I had to go I went to something and I didn't know a person there. And I had such social anxiety. I haven't had social anxiety for years because of what I've done in my work. And I usually move through the world, pretty confidently because of it. It's one thing police gave me. But but I had such social anxiety, I nearly didn't walk into the room. And it was so interesting how I felt. So I know that when you do something new, like, going to a group or stuff, it really does it takes a lot of courage.
It does, and that's actually something we're talking about at the moment with Survivor Hub, that we want to make maybe a buddy system or some sort of
Yeah.
first step, because we're noticing that we're getting large amounts of people signing up, but they're not coming, and we know it's the fear of going to your first group.
Yeah.
And I've noticed the last two, because we're getting a lot of attention since Anna's published her story on the Australian Story. And so, so if you're listening and you're interested in going to a Survivor Hub, reach out to Survivor Hub and ask if there's someone that you can connect with as a buddy to help you through getting to the first
The
meetup.
first one.
Yeah, because after that, it feels so much easier.
Well, once you've been there, you know what to expect. But with these kinds of situations where you really want to lean on other people, it's not natural. It doesn't feel natural to ask for help.
Yep.
And it doesn't feel natural to and if you don't know anyone, it takes so much courage and it takes so much, bravery. So I can totally relate. But once you're there, all of it goes away. You just need to be brave for like a few seconds, a few minutes once you walk in the door, and then it all dissipates.
Absolutely. And I'm always open to people DMing me and like saying, letting me know that they're keen to come, and then we can have a chat. Like, yeah, I'm always there for those.
I haven't given you a warning on this question, but you might surprise us. So the question is, and this is something I ask of everyone, if parents knew what you knew, so if parents knew what you knew about life, surviving, healing, what would you want parents to know?
Oh, goodness.
For their young people, let's bring it back to their kids.
Probably, it's really tough because as a parent now, it's going to have to be, it's not something I've had to deal with yet, but I know it's something that will be big eventually when it happens. But I think it's really important just to, when young people talk to you, really, even if it's about the trivial stuff,
Yeah.
I think it's just really important to value what they're sharing with you. And even the fact that they're coming to you and choosing you to share that with is a special thing. And I think that really should be honored, because when it comes to the bigger stuff, you want to foster that relationship of trust and that you're always there for them, that they can go to mum. Like, I love that saying that says, I want my daughter to always, when something goes wrong, something goes bad or whatever, that she thinks, oh, I'll call my mum, she'll know what to do. I love that there's a post or a meme or something. And I want to have that relationship with my daughter where she doesn't feel like if she calls me, she's going to get in trouble or talks to me about something that I'm going to go to the police. I think it's really important that we foster this sense of that our young people, like, that it's not this, I talk about like vertical relationships, horizontal relationships. I think it's really important to foster a horizontal relationship, even though we know there's a power imbalance with parent and child. But when we foster a horizontal relationship, we're acknowledging that we're equal in the relationship. We both have power. And I think what I see a lot in terms of young people can feel quite disempowered by parents sometimes when they disclose things. Like even a conversation I had with a young person at the youth centre recently, I said to them, would you feel comfortable coming to me if one of your friends was in trouble? And they said, well, we'd be just concerned about mandatory reporting, that you would get police involved. And I said, okay, I understand that. And that's a massive concern for kids at the moment. And so I know it's something we're trying to navigate. So I think it's just really important that we let kids know that, hey, we would never make choices without you being involved, and
or
that
letting you know what we were doing. It's not without your impact, your
you would be
consideration
involved.
and your involvement.
I love the idea of, and I even said to them, I said, you know what I would do? I would never take that power away from you. You would always have choices. And I said, you know what we would do? We'd just go and collect the information together. So what I would do, I would work with you. We would actually call up 1-800-RESPECT, and we would chat with them and find out, what are your options? What information do we need that we're missing? And then we make informed choices.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I would want to share that, I think, that advice with parents. Yeah.
And I would mirror that, because if your child, every conversation you have with your child is setting them up, or setting up the conversation that you might have to have with your child. For instance, like, if you can't talk about the small stuff and you're not listening to the small stuff, and our children sometimes test us with small stuff to see how we're going to react before they tell us the big stuff. And so if we're not giving them that safe space to talk to us, and we're not listening, and we're telling them they're annoying, go away, or whatever happens, and it can happen because we get time poor and we're exhausted. But if we have that ongoing relationship where our child doesn't feel like they can come to us and talk to us, when something big happens, they're not going to get on the phone to us. They're not going to talk to us. They're not going to share anything with us, and they're going to be alone trying to deal with something massive.
Yeah. And it can be really hard, even if you're of one perspective and you're co-parenting or whatever, or you're in a relationship. Because even like Sophia's father, we've had experiences where he's shut down conversations. Like, I've been trying to have a conversation about porn. I've been trying to have a conversation about consent. And then he'll be like, oh, no. We're not having this conversation at dinner. No, because he's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Then we challenge him and say,
oh my God, that's exhausting. That's so exhausting.
I know. You just say, sit there and be quiet and listen.
I was like, there's a parent webinar on this. Let's go. That was hard. I was like pulling teeth, but I feel like, yeah,
we do deal with a lot of like parent, look, because there's so many stigmas, parent opinions, our own parents. Like, I still hear my own parents in the background and sometimes I'll blurt stuff out at my own daughter, and I'll have to pull it back in and go, I'm so sorry, I don't know where that came from. It was my mum or my grandmother or my dad. Like,
I love that.
And she calls me out on it. What we want is our kids to call us out on our shit, right?
I love that, yeah.
And the only way they can do that is if we empower them and tell them that they can call us out on our shit, and we can tell them that, like, if you don't agree with me, tell me, and I'm going to listen.
Yeah, I haven't got all the answers. We're going to figure this out together. Exactly.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. So thank you so much, Renee. I know this has been a long time coming, and we had a bit of it was so funny. We had a bit of a struggle getting on times, but we made it. We did it.
We made it. Where there's a will, there's a way.
But thank you for the conversation. So I'll put all of Renee's details in the show notes, and look forward to what you're providing, all of the stuff that you're putting up on your Instagram and the Survivor Hub stuff. I really think that if there's any victim survivors on the call, sorry, not on the call, but on the listening to this pod, definitely have a look at that Shake the Walls, because as I said, when I wrote my own story, and even though it wasn't the full, what was in the book isn't the full story, because we had to shorten it down and make it more palatable, but it's so powerful that like writing it down, it healed so much inside, and that's what you're providing survivors. Absolutely. Basically.
And you shouldn't have to go through that process by yourself, and that's what I offer, is that coaching. And yeah, everything's online with video support, and then we do like 2 coaching calls.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
I think it's so powerful. So thank you very much for doing this work and helping survivors.
Thank you for your important work, and I do believe that I need to get back in touch with you to have a chat about you doing some work with me with local government, creating.
That'd be great. I might be over in, actually, no, you're in New South Wales. I might be going over to Queensland later in the year for some schools. So I might be over your way, might just have to do a few little.
Think it up then.
Anyway, have a good rest of your day. Thank you for listening to this podcast episode. Education empowers children and empowers parents, and education prevents abuse. That is why I'm here, and that is why you are here. So thank you. If you want any further information or support, follow me on social media, either under Kristi McVie or Cape AU social media accounts. I'll put the links in the show notes. You can also purchase a copy of my book, Operation Kid Safe, via the website at www.cape-au.com. Also on my website is a free ebook titled 10 Tips to Keep Your Kids Safe from Abuse, and self-paced courses for parents to help you in your journey of child abuse prevention. Please see the show notes for any extra information, links and help should you be looking for extra support. Thank you once again for giving a shit about preventing child sexual abuse. See you next time.